All right, I have 5 o'clock, and I would like to welcome everyone to the Kid Central Virtual Education Forum, where we hope to help answer some of those questions about school reopening. And we have Kit Humber, Director of Student Services for Citrus County Schools, joining us today, along with our Kid Central Education Liaison, Debbie Winters. I'm Jessica Gilbert, the Director of Community Affairs for Kid Central. And I think we're ready to get started, Miss Debbie. So do you want to go ahead and we can start the PowerPoint?
Sure, thank you. And I can't see everyone who's on at the moment, so I'm not sure if Kit is on or with us there. Is that you, Kit? Okay, I'll go ahead and at least start. Want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Jessica, is it coming through all right?
Yep, you're doing great.
Okay, all right. And I know we've all gotten very used to Zoom and hearing dogs bark and, cats walk across the screen when you're talking. I will just give the whole team here a warning. For those that were on one with me the other day, we also have a macaw who has the intelligence of a 2 or 3 year old, which means they just say what they want when they want and demand it until you give it to them. So, and they live for 70 years. So 70 years of a toddler in your house is wearing very thin. So if you hear a scream in the background, I jump too sometimes because it startles me. So just prefacing my presentation with that. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you, Jessica, for coordinating this and for the team that put this together rather quickly, because we know that there's a lot of questions that are coming up. Most of them I think we can probably help clarify today and answer. If there is anything that we cannot, we will absolutely follow up. I am going to ask that we wait until the end for any questions, because hopefully through the presentation it will answer questions that may, pop up along the way. We also really won't be able to entertain child-specific kind of questions in this format, but we certainly can make that a follow-up as need be. So I think one of the first things that we want to talk about is how distance learning and that experience. And I wasn't sure whether to call this an experience. I'm sure in many ways it felt like an experiment because it was an experience on both ends. And I know that, we experienced it as families and caregivers, whether it is from our work sense for those of us that are, here today as employees and balancing work and home and teaching children. I think the school districts also learned a great deal from the experience as well. And we have to keep in mind that when distance learning initially came about, remember that time back around spring break when we were like, oh my God, the kids are going to be home for 2 weeks and we have to, figure this out, because it was initially just a 2 week, essentially an extension, right, of spring break. Then it was, okay, we're going to be doing this for a little bit longer, that they'll be coming back, and then finally, it ultimately became the remainder of the school year, which amounted really for 25% of the school year. So it was necessary for districts to adapt and whatnot. I know, some of our school districts were initially doing like paper packets, especially for the little ones. And that obviously had to change because this was not something that was going to be simply a 2 or 3 week period of time. The districts also, and this is speaking generally, this is not necessarily Citrus specific, but there was a variety of tools and platforms and resources. I mean, some things were Google Classroom, some things were Edgenuity, some, were, emails and all kinds of ways that the learning was done. So it also became a little, confusing at sometimes for caregivers. And this wasn't, a parental choice. There is and we'll be talking about, virtual school, which, has been around for a while and is a parental choice. This was something that kind of, happened upon us all. The majority of students did engage in distance learning. Some maybe not as much as others. and there was a small subset in every county that where children did not participate at all. And that's not to say that that was what the parent or the child desired, but sometimes there were connectivity issues. There were, kids maybe were families that were first responders. And I mean, I know some families where they said, okay, the kids are going up to their grandparents, in Georgia for this period of time. So we can't say that kids who didn't participate, that it was on them or on their caregivers. Um, some students absolutely thrived. I think probably for every time I have had a situation come up where it's been, how difficult the distance learning was in a household for a child, another child in the household thrived. Because for some kids, it provided them the opportunity to stay focused. They didn't have the distractions. They just got the work done, and others really needed those supports that they would normally have gotten in the school setting. So, as I said too, the districts, I think, learned a great deal from the experience and have modified their remote learning plans accordingly. So as they move forward, should we have a shutdown again, things will certainly look different at that time. So to look at the as it relates specifically to citrus, Jess, if you could advance, sorry. So the options that Citrus County has presented to families is the option to either return to the traditional school campus on a full-time basis or enroll in the Citrus virtual school full-time. And the reason that we kind of expedited and did this meeting kind of quick, I mean, literally, when we decided to have this, the deadline was actually Saturday, and the district recognized that the time needed to be extended for families. So they did extend the deadline until the 17th of this month. It's important to know that after that time, enrollment will automatically default to a brick and mortar school. And just, I do want to share that that's not an unusual thing. Most districts have an application deadline for their virtual schools. So, and it's typically, about a month or so before the start of the school year. So the situation now, though, is very different because your virtual school populations in most school districts was relatively consistent. But because of this, they may have more families choosing virtual school, which means we have to look at staffing patterns and teachers and so on differently in the virtual school environment. So that's why we need to have that deadline so the planning can be done appropriately. In Citrus County, the registration for choosing the option is being done through the Skyward Family Access account. And those that do not have an account must create one, and there's more on that a little bit later. It's important to understand that both of the options, whether virtual or attending the brick and mortar school starts August 10th. So that's a month from tomorrow. Just a little quick highlight of some of the things. This is not necessarily a side-by-side comparison, but when you look at district school, obviously we're utilizing district adopted textbooks and resources. So the class times are structured. You have all the special programs, whether it's IB, special academies, the AVID program, kids get school meals. This year, of course, virtual meetings will be probably the more common than any kind of face-to-face meetings. And that will be a little different. Obviously, sanitation and safety precautions are going to be enhanced. And again, more on that. In the virtual school for Citrus, they utilize the Florida virtual curriculum. It offers flexibility in terms of when kids are doing work, but there are some structured times and activities. There might be, kind of meetings with teachers and that sort of thing. It's important to know as well that there may be less in terms of things like the elective courses and whatnot. The virtual school will certainly have all of the core courses and electives, but they may not have the array that might be available in a traditional school. For students that are in the pre-IB programs, if they're in their freshman and sophomore year, they'll be able to continue to do their academics through Florida through the virtual school. But the juniors and seniors, those courses are going to be on class, so they would need to be back to their brick and mortar school by their junior or senior year. With virtual school, parents serve as the learning coach. There's obviously teachers, and the teachers are local teachers, Florida certified teachers, but parents serve as a learning coach. They must have an online access, and it needs to be pretty reliable. And Citrus County, I commend them because they are one of the districts that has indicated that if a family does not have the devices needed to participate in virtual school, they will provide them if needed. I can say that may not be true in other school districts. One of the things also is that when choosing virtual school, that needs to be the commitment for a full semester, if not the full school year. What they're not looking at is having children jump between virtual school and brick and mortar and vice versa during the middle of a semester. Both options, students can participate in athletics, clubs, and extracurricular activities at school. So if you're a Citrus virtual student and you're playing, on the Citrus High basketball team, that is something that still can be done. Both will also be participating in all state district mandated standardized testing. So when they're FSAs and any other district type of testing that might be done, virtual students participate in those as well. And both follow the district established student calendar. So the start date, the last day of school, the grading periods, the days off, those are all consistent for both options. So in virtual school, and again, we kind of wanted to make sure we were distinguishing and having folks understand that virtual school is not distance learning. Again, that's why we kind of talked about what distance learning was. It was a response to, a crisis situation, if you will. Virtual schools have been around for many, many years. Some students do their entire academic career through virtual school, whether that is a district operated one or the state one that many people know, Florida Virtual School. But every school district in Florida does operate their own virtual school. Some of them are franchisees, if I'm saying that, using FLVS courses. Some of them use other state-approved virtual instruction providers, and others operate their own virtual school program. And as I said, it's a choice that's been in place for many, many years throughout Florida, and many students do that as their school. The staff are specifically hired and trained to provide learning outside of the classroom. One of the challenges, I think, for a lot of staff across the state and really across the country is, they are trained to be teachers in a face-to-face environment. They are, my gosh, me trying to learn this Zoom. I was like sending Jessica emails earlier today because I'm like, if I have to run this thing, I don't know what to do. That would be me as a classroom teacher, not being able to figure out some of the technology and stuff. So it was it was as much a learning experience for schools and school staff as it was for students and families. Next up. So if choosing the traditional brick and mortar campuses, and this list is not exhaustive by any means, and if anyone has not gone on to the Citrus County Schools website, they've got a really wonderful page with all kinds of information, questions and answers, and far more detail than what is here. This is really just kind of a highlights. I know between myself, out-of-home care, case managers, licensing. Everyone is kind of fielding some questions from caregivers, whether they are foster parents, whether they are kinship caregivers, whether they're non-relative placements or relative placements. The issues are really the same. And so I would encourage anyone to go to the Citrus website to check that out. So, but just some highlights. Masks are recommended, but not required. And that, of course, is going to be subject to change should there be any guidance issued differently from local or state health authorities. Social distancing will be done to the extent feasible. There'll be a limit on large group gatherings, and pep rallies and field trips will be limited and that sort of thing. Staff will be wiping down frequently touched surfaces throughout the day. The schools will have a school-wide cleaning at the end of the day. They'll see many more hand sanitizer stations, if you will, across the campuses and on buses, and may carry their own hand sanitizer as well. And additionally, there will be increased signage and teacher guidance, with especially the little ones, about reminding and washing hands and what social distancing means, and, other forms of hygiene, and, coughing and sneezing into the elbow, and, not wiping it on your neighbor's sleeve and that sort of thing. Okay, some other measures, they'll be limiting limiting visitors to essential visitors and volunteers on campus. This, example may mean, parents who maybe normally go and have lunch with their child, every Wednesday or something. That's not going to be considered essential. I can imagine that, except in maybe some extenuating circumstances, the effect on our system of care is this could impact things like visits from case managers and guardian ad litem at school. That has often been a convenient place to conduct that, but it might not. And I think we also, for the folks that are staff here, need to realize that that's not a requirement to unless there is a child safety issue, of course, but that's not typically something that we would say it would be an essential or requirement, that those visits take place on school campuses. High-touch surfaces on the buses will be wiped down with disinfectant between each run. The bus that runs out in the morning and gets high school students usually does a circle back, and is also taking other level students on runs later. So that's what I mean in between runs. At the end of the morning, when the buses are back to the depot or bus barn or whatever district might call it, they'll be sprayed with disinfectant, both after their morning runs and then after their afternoon runs. To the extent feasible, there will be limited sharing of seating on buses, and try to keep it within household members at least. We know that's not always going to be feasible. It's not going to be possible for school districts to have sufficient buses and drivers to, have kids on every other seat and that sort of thing. So again, the encouraging of wearing masks and reminding kids about doing that when they're on the bus. There will not be self-service in the cafeteria, so that will be served by cafeteria staff. They'll also be utilizing a touchless barcoding system for the meal purchases. Where it's possible, they will be adjusting schedules so that you're reducing the number of students in a cafeteria at any given time. And also, where possible, have seating. Normally, if you've been in the student cafeteria and you're sitting opposite, there's benches on each side of the table. They're going to be trying to have everybody, facing the one direction so that they're not directly across from someone when feasible. It's going to also depend on the total numbers that are at the brick and mortar schools. Okay. So some of the common questions that have come up really even before Some of the school options were presented, and I will readily admit these were taken almost verbatim right off of the Citrus County Schools website. So I hopefully am reporting what is current and accurate as far as the school district's concerned. So again, as I talked before, we're trying to avoid children changing options in the middle of a semester. So if my child starts at her school and I decide that I want to change to virtual school, what would happen? And again, they're looking to do transferring of options after the completion of a semester. So that means up until winter break, or in some cases, parents might want to continue it through the entire school year. If there's compelling reasons at other times, the district has indicated that they will take that into consideration if possible at that time. And same thing is if I start virtual school and then change my mind. Again, they're looking for a semester, a year-long commitment, and compelling reasons for a change might be considered. My son was to start VPK this fall. Can he do virtual school? And the answer to that is no, unfortunately. The VPK is a face-to-face instructional model, and the virtual schools are not available for pre-kindergarten programs. The exception to that is that in pre-K ESE, there would be opportunity for that, but the VPK program must be done in a face-to-face manner. What will happen if schools have to close again? Schools would have to revert to distance learning, but as I said, many districts have modified their district learning plans. So if we did have to get back to distance learning, it's going to look very different than it did for the latter quarter of this past school year. In Citrus, they have determined that they'll be using a single academic platform called Canvas, and that will help streamline all the various tools and curriculum that might be used. What will happen if a student or staff tests positive for COVID-19? The district will have to defer to local health officials with regard to what kind of notifications might need to take place, whether there needs to be quarantining or recommendation for testing. So they'll defer to the health department for that. All right, can students with IEPs or 504 plans enroll in virtual school? This one has come up rather frequently. And when we look at our youth population that is in out-of-home care, we have roughly 40% of our children in out-of-home care who have an IEP due to an educational disability of some form. And that doesn't take into account those that might be suspected of or are in the evaluation process, nor does it include students that might have other impairments that don't require specialized instruction, but they perhaps need accommodations through a 504 plan because of those impairments. And so, yes, virtual school is an option for any of those students. And the district will be providing, once they have all of the students who have enrolled in distance learning, or excuse me, in the virtual school, they will be providing that information to the district ESE office, who can work with the school-based ESE specialists and 504 coordinators, because there may need to be some modifications. A child who has a visual impairment, or a student with some profound autism or intellectual disabilities might not be able to use the platform that the virtual school is designed for. So they might need to tweak that and look at what other services might be able to be delivered remotely so that children are getting the appropriate services. I think any of us who are involved with the special education population recognize that the ESE student population was all students experienced, a loss, so to speak, of learning over this time. But students with disabilities were very disproportionately impacted by this because of the inability to provide that specialized instruction and those related services to the extent that they might normally have in a face-to-face environment. Um, Along those lines, and this was a question that came up with one of the caregivers that I spoke to just recently, that the child did not receive the PT, physical therapy, and OT, occupational therapy, that he needed during the distance learning, and how would that be different if I chose to have him in virtual school? And again, there are means to deliver those type of related services, speech therapy, OT, PT. I've watched a number of videos, and because I've thought, how do you really do PT remotely? Because you kind of think of the physical therapist or the PTA, working and hands-on with, maybe some limb movements and stuff. But it's very interesting when you have to get creative and start thinking outside of the box. But there will be times when those remote-based services are not comparable to what would be provided. And an IEP, again, is a contract, if you will, between saying what the school system is going to provide the student with a disability in order for them to benefit from their education. So some of those services may not be best provided in a remote situation, and they'll have to look at what other options might be available to maintain that level of service. I have heard this question from a number of folks saying that, not school system folks, I will make that clear, that, oh, they didn't end up doing the evaluation because of the whole COVID thing. And I do want to share that that's not the situation. Districts, it might have had to look different, and maybe there were situations where parents deferred and said, you know what, let's wait until school's back in session. But the school districts across the country were not granted a reprieve or a waiver from doing what's required under the federal law in order to evaluate and find, evaluate and service students that have disabilities. So if a child is in virtual school, absolutely, they can still be evaluated for a disability, and depending on the type, it may need to be in some face-to-face fashion. Sometimes there's behavior checklists. It's kind of hard to observe a child in a classroom setting if that is, at the dining room table and there aren't peers to see how they interact with. So again, it's going to be some thinking and working outside of the box for sure. Okay, so, and this is the last slide, so we'll be opening it up to any questions afterwards. And I don't see everybody who's on at one time, so I'm not 100% sure if Kit was successful in getting through to answer questions if they do come up. But just to again, the next steps are for families in Citrus County need to do their homework, look at what they feel would work best for their situation. I think most of us would agree that the more robust instruction for a child takes place in a traditional school environment, and doing virtual school is really not something that all students are going to be successful in. And under normal circumstances, I often host education calls when we have caregivers that are considering other types of options than the traditional school setting, because there are definitely things that work in the favor and things that may not so much. Right now, of course, this is a little different. We may have families who have, members in the household who are first responders or, working in the medical field. They may have medically compromised individuals in the home and are concerned about someone in the household being out and about in the community. So, there may be decisions made that might not normally be made in terms of virtual school versus the brick and mortar. But there has to be a decision made, and the decision needs to be made by July 17th, as I said, otherwise it will default to being at your brick and mortar school. So if you want to continue with make that choice known that you're continuing with your on-campus education, all of that, everything is going to be done through the Skyward Family Access. And a parent or caregiver would simply need to update the 2021 emergency contact form. And again, think of every child. It's not done one child and that does the whole household. You have to do that for each child. If current Citrus County students are seeking to enroll in virtual school, you again, through the Family Access login, have to complete a new school enrollment, and then there'll be a drop-down menu and you'll select Citrus Virtual when choosing the new school. It's a new school, but for an existing child. And for any students that are new to Citrus schools this year, whether that's an incoming kindergarten student or a new student who has transferred into the county, if the family already has a Skyward account, they would go through the same process. And if they have not, they would need to create one. I didn't go through the whole step-by-step, but it's relatively simple. There's a link right on the front page of the Citrus website. It says Skyward, and it walks you right through the steps that you need to do to create an account. And again, I know I've said it a couple of times, but the deadline for making decision is July 17th. As I said, it was previously going to be the 11th. So for those that might be participating, know that the extension has been granted till the 17th. Thank you, Jessica.
I'm just trying to keep up with you, Deb. Great job.
Okay. All right. So again, and I'm sorry, I've said it a couple times. Kit, are you on the call? I know how bad phone service can be, and I know she was going to be in her car to call in. Just want to give her a chance in case she's on mute or something.
There is someone on a cell phone. I'm not sure if that's her. If you're on a cell phone and you're trying to talk, you have to do *6 before you can be unmuted.
I can unmute you too if you need me to. Oh, got her.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, is that you, Kit?
It is me.
It is. Okay, wonderful. So for those of you that are on the call, this is Kit Humber, who is the Director of Student Services for Citrus County Schools. And I thank you so much, Kit, for joining us with this forum.
My pleasure. It's my pleasure. Actually, I've been listening to the whole thing, and whoever helped me with the *6, thank you, because I would not have known to do that. I kept saying, hello, hello. But I do have to say that you did a very, very good job explaining all of that stuff. So I do appreciate that, and I appreciate your positive words and support for our school system, because everybody's been working very hard to try to make this as seamless as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kit. Is there anything, and I know it's kind of hard when you're listening and can't necessarily see the PowerPoint, but is there anything that you want to add that we may have left out? Or as I know I'm sure your office has fielded a lot of parental concerns that maybe we didn't touch on here?
No, not really. You touched on, what if someone tests positive for COVID, when they're at the school, and we will, like you said, defer, and we're working very closely with the health department. They've been wonderful. They did send out a lot of information today, kind of just some CDC guidelines on just multiple scenarios that Now I'm working on getting those scenarios in a format that, you know, parents can see, especially for, you know, this is related primarily to those that their students are going back to brick and mortar. You know, what if someone tests positive, or what if someone has symptoms, those types of things of what actions that we'll be taking. If somebody comes to school and, you know, they have to go to the clinic because they have a fever, we have isolation rooms that will be set up, you know, to prevent infecting others. So, you know, I feel like we're you know, we're getting there with that, so that we'll have additional information for parents on just some different scenarios. We're putting videos and things together that will be appropriate for students, so that they can understand the virus and understand what social distancing means, you know, the precautions that they can take to keep themselves and others safe, that type of thing.
Right. Perfect. I know that some folks may have questions, and Jessica, I'm not sure if you want them to, you know,
Yeah, if they just
put
want
them out, if there are questions, and we can field them that way, or
either way works for me. If you guys ask the questions, or if you want to send that, I can read it. Either way works.
yeah, I just know that most people are on mute, and to avoid everybody kind of, you know, asking something at once, it might be easier if they can type it into the chat. And that way too, we've also sort of got a bit of a record.
I'm going to walk outside for a second. Somebody's pressure washing at my house, so hang on a minute. Can you turn that off for just a minute?
I think we've got somebody typing the question. I'm
Sorry.
Now you're fine.
Trying to let my dogs out. They've been inside for 10 hours. Come on. Okay.
Yeah, the school districts are working 10-hour days, and most
Okay, I can hear now. He turned that
closed
thing
on
off.
Fridays. So this is like, you know, Friday at 5 o'clock for Kit.
Right. But go ahead. I can hear
Okay.
now.
Okay. All right. I was just saying that we were going ahead and telling folks to go type in a question. So a question has come up about sports and choir. And I'm assuming that that means if a student is, I'm not sure if that is related to on-campus students or students who participate in virtual. But maybe we can talk a little bit about how things like those type of activities are accessible to students.
Well, yes, those would all be available to both students that are in brick and mortar and if they're on virtual. At this time, we're kind of up in the air with some of those things because of the, you know, social distancing that's required. I mean, if things can be in a setting like, let's say you didn't have too many people in a choir and you could really separate them, we would continue things like that. But that is really going to be on a case-by-case, you know, or a club-by-club determination. I just can't say for sure.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, at this time, you know, they're saying right now that our numbers are spiking. So it could be a little bit of a setback for things like that where we don't have as much control to social distance students. So yeah, that's just one of those, we'll just, you know, just keep watching the website and things like that for that information.
Right.
But if we have them and they're open, yes, those students are entitled to participate.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I
Deb,
think with the athletics, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, they're depending on,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
track kind of
Same
stuff, you
thing.
can social distance a little better than you can in football.
That's right. Yep. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
I know one of the questions we got from our foster parents was if they take a new placement during the school year, how will that work with making the decision now? And if they come to me from a brick and mortar, can we switch them to virtual or vice versa? Can I ask a placement when they call what way they are attending school? Do we want to cover that? Joy, Deb, and maybe Kit can chime in a little bit with how those options are going to work out when there is a situation that arises like that.
Right.
Yeah, well, the reason that districts put a deadline on virtual enrollment is because it's very sequential with virtual, where, let's say like they're on a semester course and a student comes to a foster parent after the first quarter. It would not be feasible, and it would definitely not be in that student's best interest to enroll in virtual at that time because they've missed half of the semester. Whereas with, brick and mortar, the teacher has a little bit more latitude to catch the student up and maybe just give them the essentials that they needed for that first quarter to be successful for the second quarter. I don't know if that's making sense, but that is why there's deadlines for virtual. It's just, it runs from this date to this date, and it just doesn't allow as much wiggle room as brick and mortar does.
Right. And I think, I know that it's, for many of the caregivers, and it could be where we do have situations where a child, and I think this is kind of the thinking behind the question. I mean, a child might have been in a brick and mortar school, let's just say in Marion County, and is now placed in a foster placement in Citrus, and they have opted to have all of their students in, members of their household in virtual for whatever reason, and they just cannot afford to have this new youth, out at a school campus, and so I think that. And I know that those are the, when we talked a little bit earlier today and stuff, we may not be able to have solid answers for folks. I'm sure if there's very extenuating circumstances or compelling reasons that they might have to look at that differently. I mean, on one hand, from a positive perspective, I mean, Florida virtual, the courses are Florida courses. It's the same, but for the child who has maybe bounced a little bit, it is certainly easier to do those filling of gaps in a brick and mortar environment. But for all intent and purposes, if you're in, civics at a brick and mortar school, the civics course on, through virtual is the same curriculum and course.
Oh, yeah.
But so we probably will have to, I think the best answer is probably going to be, that's going to have to be on a case-by-case basis.
And it will be. I was just trying to point out that it's not as easily done. Normally it's not done. However, these are different circumstances, and you're right, Deb, that we would, and our superintendent has said that. I mean, there's a deadline. However, if there are extenuating circumstances, there are special circumstances, we would certainly look at each one of those on an individual basis.
Right.
And
I'm sure that's going to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kit.
No, I'm all about, doing what's right for those children who have been moved here, there, everywhere. I mean, since the virtual is ours and it's our teachers, it will probably be, a good thing is it will be a lot easier to transfer grades from, let's say, Marion County into a virtual program. It's almost like they would pick up where they left off.
Right.
If that were the best placement for that child.
Right.
So I don't want anybody to worry about that if they got a student, at a kind of an odd time during the semester, that we wouldn't look at what would be in the best interest of that child. We will always do that.
I know. Citrus has been a wonderful partner with us in supporting our kids. So thank you for that, Kit. And I think that, the scenario, I mean, there could be out of home care situations. I mean, if I had school age children and had opted for it, but then I end up with, my medically compromised parent having to come and move in my home, I might want to be making a different, I might want to look at something different myself. So there's always going to be unique circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the other part of that question, Jessica, was about the, kind of asking that question, because I know for foster parents who, when they're contacted about a new placement, I can certainly see that being a question that they would want to know. So I know, we might have to engage our placement staff a little bit to get those, not just the details of where they had been going to school, but in what, format that they've been doing it. Because, and also depending on the county that the child might be coming from, some of their models are looking a little different. You've got, Lake County, for instance, is doing a hybrid model where kids are going a couple, for partial day set for language arts and math, and then doing, their other courses, in a remote fashion. So there are going to be a number of different scenarios with placements that we'll probably have to take into account, because we certainly don't want a child going into a placement and then finding out that the school option doesn't work. And now the placement is disrupted because of that. So that's going to require a little work on our front end to make sure that it's going to be successful for everyone.
Right.
Do we have any more questions? I don't have any coming in, so I don't know if Deb or Kit has anything extra to add, but we appreciate everybody joining us and getting the information from Deb and the school district for Citrus. So hopefully we've answered all of your questions. If not, Deb, do you want to give contact information?
Certainly. Sure. My email is Deborah, and that's DEBORAH .winters WINTERS @kidscentralinc.org.
And our office number, if anybody needs to call and speak with me, it's 352-527-0090. Sometimes that's easier to get a message to me than the email. Sometimes it, depending on the day, I may not get to an email, it may be 24 hours. So if you call, leave a message, at least one of the secretaries will get in touch with me.
Right. Thank you, Kit, for that. Is there, I know as far as Kids Central staff folks that are on the call, anything else that you think we need to address, or questions that may have come up through you? We just want to make sure we're giving the opportunity to everybody.
No, this is Shalonda. I just think this was a wonderful presentation. You did a wonderful job, Deb, as usual. And I do thank you, Ms. Kit, for getting on. And Jessica for moderating.
Yeah. And one last little thing I do want to add is that Deb talked about our limit on who is going to be able to come into school, like parents to have lunch and just different things like that. But if it's a situation And Deb, you can talk to Michelle or whatever you need to do. If there's ever a situation and there's trouble with, getting a case manager in to see a family like at their home or anything like that, just, if you give me a heads up, I can make arrangements for something like that to happen. If they did have to, if the only option was for them to go into the school to see a child.
Right. No, thank you for that, Kit, because we do want to try and have our staff, minimize, the visits to schools and that sort of thing.
No,
So-
I agree. Yeah, and I appreciate that, but I also know for some, somebody putting their eyes on a child is very important. So
absolutely.
give me a call if that's ever, a barrier or anything like that. If we need to do something like that, we'll just have to make other arrangements.
Okay. All right. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Louise.
Mm-hmm.
There is one other question that's just popped up, and it relates to surrogate parents. And when a surrogate parent needs to sign for permissions. And I'm not sure if this means permissions as to the choice of school or other types of permissions. So I'm sort of asking for a little bit of, and the answer is yes. Yeah, so I've really thought about, how this is going to be impacted, because whenever we, as I mentioned earlier, whenever we have had caregivers, whether it's a relative, a non-relative, a foster parent, who want to consider a choice option, if you will, say, going to home education or virtual school, or requesting an out-of-zone assignment, or going to private school. We have always said that really needs to be a collective dialogue from those that are involved with the child, meaning the caregiver, the parent, guardian ad litem, so that everyone is understanding what those choices mean. Because with every choice, as in life, there are pros and cons with it. And so as our work group was kind of talking yesterday, and one of the issues I brought up, I don't necessarily have the answer for it, except that with the deadline extension in Citrus, it might allow for this a little more. But, when we have children who are in and out of home care, or whether that's formal or informally, unless there's been an order, otherwise, parents do still have rights to be involved with their child's education and request records and be in school meetings. And in the case of a surrogate parent, that would be a person who, when there is no parent, say parental rights are terminated or their whereabouts is unknown, and you have a child with a disability or a suspected disability, educationally speaking, that a surrogate parent serves as the child's parent for that educational decision making. So along the same lines as, the question raises it as surrogate, but it's really true for any person that would be the parent. We may have parents of children in care who have very strong feelings, either to return to a brick and mortar school or absolutely don't want their child to, coupled with the sentiments of the caregiver in those household situations. So I do think that it's important that those dialogues take place. They may not always be smooth, happy dialogues, especially if there is a very differing opinions on it. But we would be remiss if we didn't indicate that in this process, we do need to take into consideration, or at least involve the parents in that dialogue and choice to the extent possible.
Hey, Deb, I want to add something to that, because actually Tom Renew, our attorney, brought that up today. It was something that was discussed earlier this week on a statewide legal committee that he sits on with all the attorneys.
Okay.
And they said exactly, what you said, that, there may be, most of them felt that it could be something that, the caregivers would make in the decision, but it needed to be a collective discussion, and that if the parents weren't in agreement, there may have to have some court involvement, because, honestly, the parents, especially if their rights are intact, may have a objection that needed to be dealt with in the court system. But so it's good that you said that, because it is something that we're going to have to make sure. And I don't know that he indicated that there was a final decision, but for the most part, I think they were all saying exactly what you were saying, that it should be something that collectively is discussed with all parties, and so we can all make sure we're either on the same page or have it addressed in court.
Right. Thank you, Shalonda.
Well, if we have no other questions, we want to take the time to thank you all for joining us, and especially Deborah Winters for doing a fantastic job of keeping us informed and for providing all the information, and Kit from Citrus County Schools for also joining us and adding all the additional information and making sure that we had everything right so that you guys are obviously any questions. We are here for you. So is Citrus County Schools. I'm happy to answer those questions. And thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please make sure you send them to Deb or to Kit. And we hope you guys have a good night and we have a great and successful school year.